Welcome everybody to another podcast in our series on thriving in the eye of the hurricane. It's just been a delight to do this with all the different groups that I've interviewed over since actually we started in May doing this. And I started with the people who are in my book, interviewing you, and eventually we're going to roll over into the people who have read the book, who are just readers of the book and how the book has helped their life change. So we'll be transitioning into that after the next couple of months. But thank you to all of you who are going to be speaking today. We have 4 wonderful speakers to talk about how the principles of resilience and the principles of the mind, 3 principle psychology, has impacted the field of recovery. And I'd like to just share a little bit myself about my own journey, because I'm a clinical psychologist, but for some a sort of synchronicity and happenstance, I was working in a mental health center when I was in my early 20s, just having gotten my master's degree. And the director of the new mental health center said, "Joe, you're in charge of the drug and alcohol treatment program for the center." I said, "I've never had a course on addiction." He said, "No one else has either, so you're it." And so I was thrown into the deep end of the pool, working with the heroin addicts and the alcoholics, and thus began my career in addiction. And I absolutely fell in love with people either in active addiction or in recovery. And one of the first of those was my mentor, Bud, who was an ex-drill sergeant in the Marine Corps, who had a near-death experience and ended up recovering from his alcoholism, who was the happiest human being I'd ever met up to that point in my life. When Bud would walk in the room, it would light up because of his serenity and his joy and the peace and love that he had found in his recovery. And that began my love affair with working with alcoholics and people with all kinds of addictions. And so I had many, many roles in that career. But by the time I was in my early 30s, having become the director of prevention for the state of Texas, and then a counselor in private practice and training people all over the state of Texas, and then moving back to Minnesota, I started working at the Johnson Institute and working with training counselors, and then later in private practice. But by the time I was 33, I was feeling discouraged and burned out and stressed, and wondered, am I really helping anyone? It just seemed like the same people coming back week after week with another issue and another issue. And when are we going to get to the point of being healthy? Where's the mental health? Where's the serenity? And I just knew there had to be a better way, because I was getting burned out and I was kind of the blind leading the blind. And it was at that point, at age 33, that I met Sydney Banks and learned about the 3 principles. And everything he said didn't make any sense to me, but it changed me. And when I came back to Minnesota and to my counseling practice, I knew I could no longer work the way that I had been working, which was to take people, dragging them back into the past, working through issues, getting out all their emotions, beating pillows. I couldn't do it anymore. And I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't do that anymore. And as I began to find my own joy of life and my own serenity, and my stress began to fall away, my burnout went away, and the passion that I had when I started out in my career returned. And I just knew this was going to transform the field of recovery and addictions. And so that became my passion. And a few years later, I didn't ever think I'd ever write a book, but I wrote this book, The Serenity Principle, which is still going out all over the planet and helping lots of people by educating them about the 3 principles and how that relates to recovery from addiction. So I'm extremely grateful to see the results, hear from people, and it's been also my great honor to work with treatment centers. That's how I met Lisa Portinga at Twin Town. She was the director of Twin Town Treatment Center in St. Paul, where they use the three principles working with people in recovery, and many other treatment centers in the Twin Cities. And then later, Danielle Gonat, another one of our speakers today with Gulf Breeze Recovery. I was privileged to work with them in the early days to help design their program and train their staff, and work with them for many years to help develop that program. And that was one of many other programs around the country that are using three principles in helping people in recovery. So I feel very blessed to know this myself. It cured my burnout. It really helped me see how to not only help people cope with an addiction, but to truly recover, not only from the addiction, but recover their mental health, their happiness. So we have Danielle Gonad, the clinical director at Gulf Breeze Recovery, Lisa Portinga, who's in private practice and also a consultant to Gulf Breeze Recovery, Jacqueline Hollows, who's with us all the way from the UK, who's done amazing pioneering work in the prison systems all over the UK through, I'll let her tell her story, through the inspiration as it came through her to help people who were in prison. And lastly, Brian Johnson, who I've known since he was a wee little guy, adolescent, and have followed you through your life. And Brian's got a wonderful story of his recovery that he'll share with us today. So for those of you who are here live, welcome. And for those of you who will hear this as a recording later, I also welcome you. And we will meet again in 3 weeks for our next podcast, which will be about seeing beyond our differences. And we'll have Mavis Karn telling her stories of her work. Judy Sedgman will tell about how the principles have helped her in this time of political division. And Jerry Williams, who's a former police officer who worked with Beverly Wilson Hayes, who was our first podcast that we did, share with his experience as a police officer going in and working with, as an African-American police officer, working in minority communities in the inner city, and how seeing beyond the differences with the people he was working with helped see them as just like him and be able to see their resilience and help them. So we'll look forward to that. So I don't know who would like to go first today, but whoever feels so. Jacqueline, would you like to? I said before you even showed up, would you like? I think we'll have Jacqueline go first. So maybe you could tell, how this understanding first helped you, and then how your vision came for Beyond Recovery, and what's happening with that.
Oh, thank you, Joe, and it's wonderful to be here, everybody. So thank you so much for being here. So yeah, I'm Jacqueline Hollows. I'm in the UK. I'm the founder of a non-profit called Beyond Recovery. And I wasn't in that field at all. I was in IT, and I wasn't even interested in mental health, although I had plenty of mental health to overcome myself. So I had addiction in my family, abuse in my family, all sorts of a dodgy upbringing, I like to say. And I believed that life was about you just held on as tightly as you could and you got through it, and there wasn't any point. And it was a struggle. And there were moments of clarity and moments of insight, but I didn't know what insight was at the time. But how it looked to me was that these moments were random, and then you had to really work hard to make them happen. And so that's pretty much how I lived my life. And I have a grown-up son who's wonderful, but who suffered with addiction and mental health issues throughout his life. And we just thought, you just got to get on with it. And then in 2013-14, I came across this understanding that we're referring to as the three principles. It didn't really make a lot of sense to me when I came across it. But one of the things that happened was I read Joe's book, The Serenity Principle. And out of everything that I'd seen, the Serenity Principle, it just blew me away. I cried the first time I read it because I suddenly realized that my son was whole. And for all that time, I'd thought, he was an addict and he had mental health issues, and we just had to live with that. So I think, Joe, that might be the first time you've heard that. But and because of that, I got really interested then in the 3 principles. And along my journey, then lots of life things happened. I got made redundant, and my father, who was a big abuser in our lives, died. And I started to look further into, I basically wanted to do something more meaningful with my life. And I started to look further into therapies that could help. And I was fortunate enough to meet a load of people in recovery and in active addiction, and fall in love with them and see in them the wholeness and the amazingness. And I didn't know what that was. I just knew they were incredible and resilient and determined and persistent. And I started to talk to them about, what that is and how did that come about and so on. And through them, I realized, because every time I met someone new, I would just think, wow, they're amazing. And they would tell me their life story and what they've been through. And I would think how incredible they were. And eventually, after many people, I woke up one day and thought, well, if they're all whole, maybe I am too. So they taught me the 3 principles, or all these wonderful people in recovery. And then I wanted to share it with everybody. And I met someone who introduced me to a prison. So I ended up going and working in a prison. I volunteered for a couple of years, and then I ended up starting up a non-profit and going working with the local prison. And I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of people now. Many I'm still in touch with, or having amazing, fruitful, incredible lives. Relationships have changed. They realize potential way beyond anything that's ever been told to them about their potential. And lots and lots of what we might call transformations, but are really just people uncovering their true nature and their true selves. And what's amazing is it's the gift that keeps on giving. So just last night, I was listening to one of our mentors and teachers, and she was talking about how we just sometimes get things wrong. So, like when someone gives you some change and you think it's wrong, and you're standing there and you're looking at the change and you're frowning at the change, and you think it looks wrong, but it's actually right. Well, I realized that when we have negative thoughts about ourselves, when you might think you're fat or you're stupid or all these things that I grew up with, I'm ugly and stupid. That's what I was told every day of my life. And I thought it was true. And I realized I just got it wrong, like the change. So I'm so grateful for this gift that keeps on giving, that you can just every day realize something new and have an even deeper realization of our true nature, and see it in others and seeing it in yourself. I don't know how long that was.
Oh, you still have 3 more minutes.
Okay, I'll tell a story then.
Okay, great.
So we're just recently working with a female prison, and one of the girls, who is only young, she's about 26, and has had lots and lots of trauma, lots and lots of things go on in her life, and she's ended up in jail, and she's in for life, and she has lots of diagnoses: ADHD, addiction, Just a whole list, of things, autism. And so I brought her some colouring books, and because she couldn't sit still. So I said, would you, if you colour, would it help? So she sat on the floor colouring, and you could tell that she was calm while she was colouring and listening. And she wanted to talk to me outside the room. So we went and talked outside, and she said, she said nasty things about herself. I won't repeat on here, but she said some very, very nasty things about herself. And I sat with her quietly, and then I said, well, your spirit is pure though, isn't it? And she said, how did you know? I said, well, what do you think? Do you think that's true then? She said, I'm really spiritual, and I can see people, and I can hear people, and there's my grandma down there by the gate. And she started talking to me about this, and she said, how did you know? And I said, well, everybody's spirit is pure. And if you know that about yourself, then, you don't have to say all these horrible things about yourself. And then this other woman came out of nowhere through, I didn't even think you could get to this place, but I stood by the gate, and she said, call her Fiona. Fiona, are you troubling yourself again? And she said, I am. And she said, you know your spirit is pure, don't you? So I thought, wow, how did that happen? And so I realized that the quieter we get, all of us, and the more we lean into the guidance that is within every single person, we get to know and we get to hear what we need to say to people, what we need to say to ourselves.
Thank you, Jacqueline.
My pleasure.
Yeah, that reminds me of one of the things that I hear most often from people in different 3 Principles treatment centers or counseling is that everywhere else I've gone, people saw me as an alcoholic, a drug addict, mentally ill, traumatized, damaged goods. And what helped me so much was that you saw me as my true spirit, like you just shared. You saw my spirit. You saw who I really am, my innate health. And I began to identify with that instead of with my problem. And that began the shift. Just seeing you may still have issues or problems or thoughts or habits and behaviors, but who you are is innately healthy. And I think that's the fundamental paradigm shift in treating addiction, is you're working with the health in the addict rather than with their disease. So maybe we could transition to Danielle, who is the director at Gulf Breeze, clinical director at Gulf Breeze Recovery. I didn't want to promote you too high there, Danielle. No, you don't want to be the director. I know that.
All right. Oh, clinical director.
Yeah. So maybe you can share your story, Danielle, and just the work that you're seeing happen at your wonderful treatment center in Florida.
Sure. So as Joe mentioned, I'm the clinical director, Danielle Ganaw. I've been with Gulf Breeze Recovery since its inception about 8.5 years ago. I started out doing counseling, some of the groups. I remember some of my first few groups, the guests were acting up, and I thought I was going to get fired when we went to the zoo and they put their finger in the monkey cage and the giraffes were licking their face. But oh no. But I made it. And then I was an assistant to the previous clinical director and took over as clinical director about 4.5 years ago. And one of the things that sticks out to me is Joe came into the training before we were actually open. And I had a pretty big insight for myself. And so for those of you that teach this or want to teach this, you'll hear Joe always talk about, well, you got to catch the ball before you run with it. You got to get this for yourself. You have to see this for yourself. And I personally have never struggled with addiction, but my mom passed away from addiction And at the time, she was still alive in an active addiction. And Joe put up this picture called The Spiral of Addiction. He has it in the Serenity Principle book. And it starts out where innocently you're kind of identifying with your ego habits, and then you can kind of continue that habit, and then it spirals down pretty destructively where you kind of have denial about what's happening. You start to blame other people, and then you have guilt, shame, and some suicide ideation. Well, I had seen all those things happen with my mother, and I had seen in that moment that what my mother was doing wasn't personal. It wasn't against me. It wasn't her blaming me. That this was just the habits that happen with people in addiction. And that was so huge for me. And it was so freeing for me, because the weight of that, thinking that, somehow it was my fault or her blaming me, and partly knowing it wasn't my fault and I couldn't change these behaviors, but knowing it wasn't just her acting like that to me, but that was just habits of addiction, was huge. And that was able to transcend into my work. So I helped start a family support group, and I became really passionate about working with families and the guest here and helping the family see that this isn't personal. This isn't them choosing the substance over you. This is really them innocently wanting to feel better, them looking outside themselves and identifying with a habit. So one of the things that we share quite often with the guests and their families is the innocence of addiction. Innocently, we all want to feel better, and everybody has bad habits or things that they look to feel better. And for the guests in our treatment center, that thing that they look to is just a little different. But I think in our society as a whole, it's easy to want to numb or want to distract ourselves from uncomfortable things. So we binge watch TV, or we overeat, or we shopping and money or relationships. We constantly look outside to deal with our feelings or not deal with our feelings, or to, quote, feel better. And so when you see that and you really understand that at its core, you can see the innocence in what they're doing, and it takes that level away from the family member of making it so personal. And then you can see the person for who they are, somebody who's innocently lost and somebody who just has a misunderstanding. And I've been so blessed in my work to help so many people clear up that misunderstanding. And then even as the director, to be able to mentor and help other counselors do that. I'm a qualified supervisor, so other counselors work under my license, so they're interns. And to see them do that and the resilience it creates in them to be able to help somebody, but not take on the responsibility and not see people as broken and think it's their job to fix them, has been so empowering and so helpful for them. And it really helps them to prevent burnout and to help them see the importance of self-care and taking care of themselves and recharging themselves, so that they have more to offer and to share. Where I lost track of time too, Joe.
You're still good. I just want to make a comment. When I was teaching in the addictions department at Metro State University, I would have to go around all the intern slots and all the different treatment centers that were mostly 12-step based, more disease model. And it was fascinating to me to walk into each center. You could feel the energy of the center when you walked in. If they were burned out and, the staff wasn't in a good place, it was like this negativity was just permeating the culture of that treatment center. And other ones, they were very lighthearted and caring and loving. And you could just feel the therapeuticness level of the center by the state of mind of the counselors. So I'm really glad that you brought that up, that the principles, teaching the principles and working from that paradigm is a constant reminder to take care of your own well-being. to catch the ball before you run with it, as you said, to live what you're trying to teach other people. And so it's kind of a built-in burnout prevention for people working in this field, as well as the main vehicle for transmitting the understanding to the clients you serve. So thanks, Danielle. Is there anything else you want to add?
Well, I was just going to talk
Still
about.
have 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Okay. I was going to talk about the very thing that you mentioned, the feeling. A lot of the feedback from the guests, they talk about the feeling of being here, and that the people that are here helping them in treatment, that they're living it and they sense that. Sometimes to the point where we go, it's not Gulf Breeze Recovery, that feeling's within you. You don't have to live here or be here or close to the center to have that. That's within you. But they also, they pick up that feeling from the staff. And that's so important, that we take care of ourselves and that we're grounded in the right place so that we can help them, because they sense that and they pick up on that. And I'm just so grateful, especially as we went through the pandemic, to have this understanding in my life. And of course, you have moments where you get caught up and you're in fear, and you get stuck for a little bit. But you have that place to come home to, and you have that knowing, and you don't get stuck there. And it makes us so much more resilient. And I see that as part of my job, is to point to the resilience in other people and help them see that within themselves, even when they can't, and help them see their own power and help them learn to trust themselves. Often in addiction, people have been told, you're bad, you're bad, you're bad, make bad decisions, don't listen to them, and helping them
Don't trust yourself. Don't trust yourself. Yeah.
Yeah. And helping them to see that there's a part of them that they can trust, and learning to listen to that and rely on that within themselves is so empowering.
Yeah. That's great. Even if clients or guests, as you call them at Gulf Breeze, just experience what it feels like to feel serenity, to feel peace of mind, to feel love for themselves while they're there. Once you've experienced that, once you've tasted that, you want more of that. So it creates an incentive to go deeper and to learn more, or to know when you're off base, because a lot of them have never experienced their mental health until they've been there. And so some of them will make it about Gulf Breeze, but you guys are always really good at pointing them back. That's coming from you. So that's my timer. Maybe if we have time at the end, I'd love to, Danielle, for you to tell your story about going through an actual hurricane at Gulf Breeze and how you had to evacuate, and how the understanding helped you go through that real hurricane, not just a metaphorical hurricane. So
Sure.
we'll loop back to that. We'll spin back the hurricane to that topic.
Okay. Thanks.
So who feels inspired to go next, Brian or Lisa? Lisa's got her hand up first. She's just okay.
Well, I think you wanted Brian to go last, so I'll jump in. Hi everybody. Joe, thank you so much for inviting us to be part of your podcast today. This is really cool. And
my pleasure.
Just listening to Jacqueline and Danielle talk so far has been really inspiring and really emotional. I got a little teary, but I will compose myself.
No, that's okay. Please stay slobberingly fine. That goes well here.
Yeah, I know Brian knows exactly what I'm going through right now. So I came across the principles 23 years ago. I just finished my master's in social work, and I was looking for a job, and walked into a treatment center here in Minnesota that happened to be using 3 principles as their modality. So I got so lucky that I accidentally kind of tripped over this understanding, and that was the start. I was handed Joe's book, The Serenity Principle, and was told to go home and read it. And then if I liked it, I could come back and complete my interview, and there would be a job waiting for me. This was at Cedar Ridge, Joe. So I read the book and loved it. Didn't quite understand it. You know, there seems to be a common theme here when we first hear about the principles, where you're kind of like, I can kind of touch it, but I don't quite know what I'm touching, but it looks cool and I want more, but I don't know. So my thought was, this is great. This sounds really good. I'm going to teach this to the clients. And at Cedar Ridge, much like GBR, they called their client, GBR calls their clients guests, and Cedar Ridge called their clients students. And so my first couple of weeks there, one of the students said to me, I asked him how things were going at his treatment. And he said, you know, I really like it here. I really like this treatment. He said, you guys are treating me like I'm a whole person. And I thought, wow, this is cool. So that was my first memory of actually hearing somebody have an experience of feeling this connection to the understanding and knowing that we were working with him on a level that was beyond his addiction. So that was really impressive to me. And flash forward to now, I am an educator for GBR. I've been working with them, I think, since they opened. It sounds right to me.
Seems like it.
Yeah, it seems like it. And so that has been absolutely one of my favorite pieces of my work. And the beautiful part about that is I get to come in behind the work that Danielle and her staff have already done there. So they've already worked with the guests and taught them some of the understanding and helped them to realize that their own potential is far beyond anything they could imagine. And then I get to pick them up from the time they leave and keep working with them after that as they go through their life at home or sober house or wherever. I also take this understanding into one of the jails here in Minneapolis, and that's one of my favorite pieces of my job as well. I share Jacqueline's passion for that, and I have a couple stories that I wanted to share that I think help people understand the impact of this understanding more than my personal account could. I started out volunteering my time like Jacqueline did. I went into the jail, and, you know, you kind of have to prove yourself. You're walking in with this understanding, and this is an entity that is used to 12-step. So they're like, I don't know what you're talking about, but if you want to come in for free, we'll give you an opportunity and we'll see if this makes any sense. So I was volunteering once a week, going into the men's unit and the women's unit. And as I was talking about the principles, one of the residents, other places would call him an inmate, but at this particular jail, they're a little bit more progressive and they call him a resident. And he raised his hand and he said, "You're talking to us like we're already healthy." And I thought, whoa. And I said, "That's because you are." And I was so touched by that. And I thought, okay, good. This is getting in, like he's understanding this. And then I had a situation with a young woman in the women's unit, and I'd been working with her for about 3 months. She was young. She was in her early 20s, and she had been back to this particular corrections facility 3 times and had always committed the same crimes, gotten caught, was back in jail. And so I had been teaching her about the principles. And she walked into group one day and she sat down and she just started giggling. And the other women were kind of filtering in behind her. And so she and I had an opportunity to chat for just a second. And I said, "What's so funny?" And she said, "Well," she goes, "I don't really know how to explain it, except for the very first time, I'm sitting here not trying to figure out how I'm going to commit the crime smarter when I get out. And I was absolutely blown away. And she said, I don't know what happened, but that all of that kind of thinking has just left my head. And the other women started walking in and they heard the tail end of what she said. And you could see on their faces, some of them were like, oh, I am still thinking that way. So it was really telling that this young woman had this shift in her thought created identity. She had this ability to put that aside and know that that wasn't really her and that she could be something different. She didn't have to get released and then figure out how to do it smarter, better, so that she didn't get caught. And I haven't seen her since. And that was probably 4 years ago. I have not seen her back. And so, yeah, we just hope that that took hold of her. I also work with the treatment courts here in St. Paul and Ramsey County, with the DWI court and with drug court. And one of my favorite stories is I was working with a group of women and I was teaching them a curriculum that was court sanctioned, but my coordinator knew that I would impart 3 principles information into this curriculum. And it was kind of our little secret. And she would say, Lisa, you do whatever you want to do. The grant says that you have to teach this curriculum, but I know that you're going to come in with 3 principles, so go for it. So I would teach these women that they were not their trauma. They were not their past. They were not their abuse. They were not what people told them they were. And when we got close to graduating the women, it was an 18-week course. And we were invited to a conference, a drug court conference. And they asked several different courts around the state to give testimonials about, gender specific COG groups. And so my group was called to come and speak. And so I brought my whole group, and then there was another group of women in another court in another county in the state. They had the same curriculum we did. They did not have the 3 principles flavor to it, however. And so we're talking to this audience, and the first group talks about the curriculum. They talk about how much they learned. And they would say things like, I have this past history of trauma. It's never going to go away. I'm just going to have to learn to live with it and deal with it and move from that point. And then my group came up and the women started talking, and there was a complete shift. And they said, what I learned in my group was that I am not my trauma. I am not my past. I am not the labels people put on me. And we could see the audience kind of going, wait, what? Because it was the same curriculum, supposedly, right? And so after the conference, people started coming up to me and they said, wait, I thought you guys were the same curriculum. How come it was such a different interpretation? And I said, well, I was also teaching them that they are not their labels.
Oops. James, we got a freeze going here. Got a freeze.
I think we got Lisa back, Joe.
Yeah, Lisa, you're back. We missed you. But if you want to continue where you left off, let me see how
Sure.
we have about 9 minutes left. So maybe tell the rest of your story. And then if anybody else we don't have a big audience today, but if anyone has a question or a comment, we'll make room for that.
Well, I'm not sure when I froze. Was it? I think we had gotten to the end of our discussion at the conference, and people had come up and were asking why the women in my group felt so differently about themselves than the women in the other group. And I was able to talk a little bit about teaching them about thought, mind, and consciousness, teaching them that they were not their labels, they were not their past history, they were not their thinking. They were beyond, underneath, above all of that. So that was really cool to kind of see it come out in action at a conference, and for people to recognize that folks in the judicial system, folks with addiction, could rise above all of those labels and not stay attached to that understanding. So yeah, it was a I couldn't have scripted it any better.
Yeah,
If
really.
I had tried. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting when people who are not naive about the principles, haven't been exposed to the principles, and they walk into a conference or into a treatment center or even just a social situation, people go, wow, what's so, people are just so natural. They're so themselves. They're just so ordinary. It's not like people are putting on a front or an act, or, don't have their ego out there doing what they're doing. And, I think if you look at little kids, that they haven't yet developed an ego. They're just being kids. They're just being, they still have emotions. Like Brian was saying, you still get caught up in your thinking. We all do. I do all the time. And I've written 6 books about this now. I still get caught up in my thinking, but it doesn't have the legs that it used to. It's just, you pretty soon you see it, and then it's a good laugh. Usually it's like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that again. Here we go again, but we're human. And when you accept that humanness in yourself, you just, each blind spot that you trip over, each adversity that you face, is an opportunity to be stronger and deeper in your understanding. So it's not a failure or a setback. It's an opportunity for deeper growth. And that's what I love about the principles. They just keep giving. And for people in recovery, it's not about having to go through millions of programs or steps in order to get there. You're already there. You just forgot you're there. So is that all right, Brian? You okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Following
Okay.
your counselor there.
All right. So I'm Brian Johnson, and I went to Gulf Breeze about a little over 7 years ago. But I actually knew about the principles from in the late 80s, 1980s. I had seen Sydney Banks speak. My father took me to a conference, and I listened only with my intellect, and I heard nothing. But I knew that Sydney Banks had something that was different. And Sid spoke from a place of knowing, and I knew he had something that I wanted. And I went home and I read Second Chance that night. And then later afterwards, Joe Bailey was my counselor. I asked him to counsel me because my father had done counseling with Joe. And Joe counseled me for a year or two. I don't know how long it was, and I only listened from the intellect. Anyways, fast forward, I became addicted to alcohol and tried other drugs, and so I wound up moving from Minneapolis to Phoenix, and got into a 12-step program, and was sober for a while, but I kept on having relapses, and I wound up getting married and having 2 children. And my last relapse, I left the home and basically moved out of the house, well, I guess that's redundant, but anyways, I left the home and I was living in a converted garage, and I was drinking from noon until 10 o'clock. And just did that for about a month and realized that that's the way that I didn't want to live. And my father told me about Gulf Breeze, and just kind of happened that way. So I called Gulf Breeze, and Reed answered the phone, who worked there in admissions. And so, I pondered going there for maybe a week or two. And then I finally decided to go, and it was the best decision I ever made. So I got there and I was heavily medicated. I'd been diagnosed different things, different mental illnesses, and I'd been drinking a lot, and I was heavily medicated for a bipolar diagnosis and generalized anxiety, ADD. I think that was my current diagnosis at the time. So I got there and my wife was going to serve me divorce papers. And at the time, I didn't really care. I was pretty numb and I wouldn't have cared. But I guess you can't serve somebody papers while you're in treatment. So go figure. It kind of worked out to our advantage and our family's advantage. I really did as I look back on it. So, I softened up over the next few weeks. They lowered my medication, changed them around a little bit, got on, started feeling things, and I started feeling some remorse and started feeling, my emotions. And, in sake of time here, about a month into the program, I was starting to feel changes and people were noticing changes in me. But about a month into it, I had a big aha. Was that God loved me no matter what, and that I wasn't broken. And that was a result to watching a Super Soul Sunday video of Oprah. One of the counselors put it on, and the guy who spoke, he wasn't a Three Principles person, but he was somebody else. So I didn't sit there and go, oh, okay, I got to listen for a feeling. I've got to, do this and that. I kept on trying too hard to listen for a feeling. And doing this, don't listen for the, with the intellect. And I was just doing it too hard. And I just kind of sat back and listened to the guy. And I noticed that tears were rolling down his cheeks. Tears were rolling down Oprah's cheeks. And that was the first time I felt unconditional love in years, since I was a child. And so I felt this for myself. And then I went and called my wife. And I luckily got her on the phone and we talked for like a half an hour. And you just talked about God and love. And then the next day we had a Zoom in Danielle's room, who at the time she was my counselor. And so we had a Zoom, and for a whole hour I spoke to my wife and I don't remember a thing I said. I was so deep in the moment. It was just, I didn't really realize that I loved her that much until that day. And just words were just flowing out of my mouth. And just the feeling of love going through me was just, Danielle asked me if I needed a break afterwards. And I said, no. I said, this is the best day of my life. I feel elated. It was draining, but it was so moving all at the same time. That love is so well, it's divine, I guess you could say. They call it divine love and divine mind for a reason. So my wife at the end of it said, you're on to something. And so I went back to the group and I was like telling them about it, and the counselor was like, yeah, it's a win-win situation. And I just felt like if we stayed together or got divorced, it was, I would have been fine either way. So anyways, the good news is we stayed together, and just last week we celebrated 19 years of marriage. Now, this pandemic hasn't been the easiest thing, but I think without the principles and without this understanding, it would have been a lot harder. And I'm able to go to restaurants and bars, and my wife will have a drink, and I don't have cravings. I mean, I might have a passing thought of it. I might have a bad mood. Well, I'll have a craving of like, I don't want to feel like this. I want to feel different. But it does pass. Sometimes I get stuck for a while, and I get stuck in the muck. I might call Lisa for a session. And then, sometimes by the time we have a session, it's already passed. So it's kind of, hilarious how that works. We have some parenting challenges these days. We've got a teenager. We've got, another daughter. They're 4 years apart. Life, isn't without challenges. Sid would say it's a contact sport. Um, I started writing quotes after I left Gulf Breeze, and I ended up writing a book called Matters of the Soul. And it's out there a little bit. It hasn't sold a lot of copies, but I've gotten some good feedback from this. A little bit here and there. It kind of warms my heart, makes me feel like I've contributed. And this whole story of it took me years to actually come to have an aha moment, and the suffering I went through, or whatever you want to call it, it wasn't for nothing. Anyway, and now I have a story I can tell that helps people, and a book that I wrote that's out there that people can buy. And I still tell my story at Gulf Breeze, and I still do things like this every now and again. So I feel fortunate to do that, because I work in business, and I don't get to do that as often. But when I feel appropriate, I will tell somebody about this when the feeling is right. And I told somebody recently that I was going to do this podcast, and she said, "Well, please send me a copy." So that was a nice share that just happened spontaneously. And I was pretty nervous about doing this, but now that I rolled around to actually doing it, it's not so bad. So sometimes that false evidence appearing real, it just sort of tricks us. So I don't have any more.
We never would have guessed that you did. You feel so present, Brian, and so from the heart. It's just been beautiful. Thank you. And what I reflect on, one of the things you said, the power of that insight that you had that day when you felt that love, that unconditional love, and come through you and come from you. And that's really that awakening that happens, that is what we would call the cure for what ails us. Insight is this universal intelligence that we're all part of. And when we drop our personal thinking for even a moment, that pops to the surface. And as a psychotherapist, I would say that, as people go through their journey of life, there are these incremental pops where they have an insight, and their life shifts from that moment on. But with an understanding of how life works and how the principles work, it becomes ongoing. So we keep, there's more where that came from. The insight is like popcorn. At first it's just one pop, and then there's another pop, and pretty soon, there's lots of popping going on. And knowing that we have that resource within us is really true recovery. True recovery is not fearing the old behavior, but being drawn into your true self, and that feeling of love, that feeling of peace of mind and curiosity and joy about being alive. And that prevents relapse. That's the antidote to relapse. So anybody else have questions or comments? Those of you who are listening and not speaking, do you have any comments you want to make, or any last words that you want to share? We got about 5 minutes. Yes, Jacqueline, you unmute yourself. There you go.
If there
You're
are
experienced at this.
I had an interesting thing happen today. We're working with a group of collaborators on a big Ministry of Justice bid that we're all working on together, and we'll be the wellbeing part of that bid. And the people writing the bid are a large recovery organization. They have a 15-bed facility, and they use traditional methods. And I had a call with him this morning about the figures. There was like a tough call about the figures, and we had this tough call. And then he leaned back in his chair, and he had his pen, and he leaned back in his chair like this, and I thought, and he started saying, I've been talking to all the partners, and this and that. And I thought he was going to say, and how come you're involved? So I thought he was going to say this. And he said, and I've looked at your website, and that guy, that philosopher, Sydney Banks, wow, he knew something, didn't he? And I thought, oh, this is interesting. Where's this going to go? And he said, I'll tell you between us that we are obviously use the normal system stuff, and it's not right. It's not what we should be using. So I think we help people by being kind to them and by understanding that no one's taught them life skills, and by not by meeting with them every Friday and telling them what they haven't done, but by meeting with them every few minutes, so, like every 15 minutes or so, and saying, how's it going? Do you need any help? And he said, and that seems to really, and we seem to have the highest recovery rate. And of course I was able to say, absolutely. Well, let me tell you why. That's working, because you're seeing people as being whole and so on. And he was absolutely blown away. And of course he said, even if this doesn't go through, we'd like to talk to you and so on. And I was so moved by, for the people who want to work in this field and so on, is it's never about where you think you're going to go. Like, life shows up and presents opportunities where you get, like Lisa was saying at the end of the conference there, you get to end up sharing what the understanding is about with people that you'd never imagined sharing it with. And so I thought that was an interesting story to tell.
Mm-hmm. We're just about up with our time, but I have one more thing I wanted to share. I remember reading about when Bill Wilson, who was the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, and he had this awakening experience in similar to what Sydney Banks experienced, where he saw the oneness of life and he knew he would never drink again. It was a complete transformation. And he wrote to Dr. Carl Jung, who was a very famous psychoanalyst. And he said, told him what happened to him, and I need your help to see how I can help other people who are like me, an alcoholic, have that experience. And Carl Jung's response was really profound, an extremely deep psychoanalyst. And he said that he thought, in his experience in working with alcoholics, that alcoholism was on an unconscious level, the collective unconscious, searching for union with the divine, union with your spirit, with this impersonal higher power or essence of who we are. And he said the term in Latin, spiritus contra spiritum, spirits in search of the spirit, looking to spirit in search of your spirit. And what the insight that Sydney Banks had about our true nature being unbroken, undamageable, whole and complete, our spiritual essence, our true self, who we really are, is only hidden. It's never destroyed. It's never damaged. It's never lost. It is hidden with innocent, unnecessary, habitual thinking. That when the bubble bursts and we see beyond our own personal thinking, we find that spirit, we find what we were looking for, and we feel whole. And when we don't know that, we try to find that feeling in alcohol, in drugs, in food, in sex, in love, in approval, in money, in power, in the infinite ways that we can get addicted to things outside of ourselves that are already within. And once we gain, through insight and understanding that that's who we are, the jig's up. You can still go back into it, but you realize, oh, wait a minute, I'm looking in the wrong direction. I'm not going to get that feeling there. I just need to quiet my mind, let go of my thinking, and go back to that peace that lies within. So for me, this is just transformational. to addicts, to normies, to people of all shapes and sizes throughout the world. So I thank all of you for your sharing today. Really appreciate you sharing, especially from your heart, each of you. And hopefully this will help lots of people as they listen to this little video. So we didn't get to the hurricane, Danielle, but
Okay, thanks, Joe.
she did make it through a real hurricane, and the principals helped guide her through the process. Can you tell us just a
Best
little
episodes
snippet
ever.
of that?
Yeah.
Oh, our time's up.
No, I was just saying it's one of the best episodes ever.
Oh, go ahead, Danielle, go for it.
So we had a hurricane last year, and I don't know if anybody's been through a hurricane. You have to try to plan ahead, but you don't always know when the hurricanes are coming, and they shift and they speed up and they slow down. And we didn't want to leave the treatment center, but we didn't want to not leave the treatment center if we needed to. So I booked rooms, and we didn't use them the first night, and then we ended up using them the second night. They held them for us, and we got there late. And then the hurricane shifted, and it hit the area. So the treatment center didn't really have much damage, but there was no water and no sewer. And so then we didn't have rooms for the next night. And then I'm trying to just stay quiet in that and navigate getting us rooms for the next night. I was able to work it out with the manager, but Joe talks about thriving in the eye of the hurricane. Maybe I did a little better than just surviving, but having to keep coming back to being quiet as you do that, and as the director, the thinking of feeling responsible for the other guests and trying to make sure that they're safe and we have a place and that we can navigate all of this. And, the principles is just that gentle reminder that even when you get caught up in your thinking, as I shared earlier, you have a place to come back to. So it was, just that little reminder within me, go, oh, I don't have rooms. Okay, just trust. And there was multiple of us working it out. And we ended up having a few less rooms than we had previously, but we piled up and worked it out and got through it. But, it's moments like that when the gratitude of the principals is just overwhelming because, without it, how much more stress or pressure that would be created. And the moments of peace that you can glean in the middle of those disasters. And even just to touch that moment of peace for an instant can give such relief.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Christy, did you have your hand up? Did you want to say or ask something? I saw a hand up there. You have to unmute, Michael.
Okie doke. There's Christy.
Hi, everyone. No, I think Michael was clapping.
Oh, she was clapping. Oh, okay.
Clapping for Danielle.
Oh, thanks, Michael.
Hey, Danielle. Hey, everybody. Good to see you guys.
Hi, Michael.
Hi.
That's Christy.
Jacqueline.
Okay, well, I think that's about it. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you in 3 weeks, hopefully, if you are able to be with us. If not, we'll see you in the memory of the universal web of knowledge.